Judge laughs at black woman in court, then freezes. When she flashes her USSS badge, morning light streamed through the towering glass panels of the Fulton County Courthouse, casting long shadows across the cold marble floor, as if the building was weighing what was right and wrong. An empty chair stood at the center of the courtroom, the witness stand awaiting the woman who had made everyone in the gallery turn their heads the moment she walked in. Vanessa James, 40 years old, black. She stood tall, chin slightly tilted upward, not to challenge, but to balance the years that had passed with an unshakable belief. She wore a dark navy blazer, a high-collared white shirt, and her hair tied neatly at the back. No lipstick, no pleading gaze, no defensive expression. Only a calm so firm it unsettled those used to imposing their bias without resistance. Beside her, her brother Derek James sat at the defendant's table, hands clutching the edge as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His face no longer bore the strength of the man who had shielded her in their childhood, but that of a black man standing trial in a courtroom where truth only mattered if it fit the narrative. Across the room stood the prosecutor, Thomas Blake, who made no effort to hide a smirk of confidence. His eyes swept the courtroom as if choosing the perfect moment to deliver his performance, as if justice were just a play and he the seasoned lead actor. The courtroom doors swung open abruptly, chairs shifted. No one gave the cue, yet everyone stood. Judge Richard Callahan entered his wide black robe, sweeping with each stride, his face stern, but carrying the fatigue of someone too familiar with authority. He didn't look at anyone until his eyes fell on Vanessa. A faint smirk crossed his lips. Not a greeting, not respect, just assessment, as if he had already filed her under a specific category based on skin color, modest attire, and eyes that didn't lower as he expected. Court is now in session, the clerk's voice echoed against the stone walls like a drum roll. Vanessa didn't blink. She had seen eyes like that before from hotel security, who stopped her despite her reservation from police, who interrogated her for walking alone at night. But here, in the space where the law was supposed to be sacred, those eyes still loomed, and now had the power to judge. What they didn't know was that the woman they judged with a glance was ready to flip the entire trial with a truth they had never prepared to face. A slight sound broke the silence, the creak of a chair, as Thomas Blake stood. This prosecutor, in his early 40s hair, slicked back, tailored navy suit, red tie, knotted with precision. But his presence wasn't in the outfit. It was in the way he stepped into the courtroom center, as if the stage belonged to him before there was even an audience. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and sharp. "We have a clear case of resisting a law enforcement officer. No hesitation, no confusion, no grounds for excuse." He spoke as if reading from a well-memorized script. No nerves, no fluff, no falter. Except what he said wasn't true. Vanessa James didn't look up. She looked forward. Her gaze pointed at the prosecutor, but cut through the polished words to the footage that had been ignored. Beside her, Derek took a deep breath, once then again, as if each word from Blake added a stone to his chest. Thomas Blake began painting a false portrait. The defendant, Derek James, refused to comply and displayed aggressive behavior that threatened public safety. All signs indicate he has a history of defying the law. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. Her eyes blinked once, a small sign, but a signal of an inner storm rising. Derek had no criminal record. There wasn't a single act of resistance in the video Vanessa had watched, not once but 12 times. Frame by frame, movement by movement. Every word her brother had spoken in calm tones. "I did nothing wrong. I just asked why I was pulled over. But Blake never mentioned the video, never mentioned the body cam, never mentioned the officer slamming Derek against the hood for asking a rational question. Blake didn't need the truth. He needed a story that could win. And he thought he had written the ending. The defendant refused to comply with the arrest. Blake concluded, buttoning his suit jacket slowly, as if sealing a coffin. Judge Richard Callahan gave a slight nod, his eyes still on Vanessa, where he saw no expression and no fear. He turned to Jason Carter, the defense attorney, a young man just over 30, whose face was tense as he stood. His mouth opened, but no words carried with the weight they needed. Your Honor, we—" His voice wavered, crushed under the weight of pressure, not from a lack of truth, but because truth had been buried under a system deaf to the voiceless. Callahan sighed audibly. "Mr. Carter," he said, each word clipped, "if you have nothing new beyond the usual tiresome complaints, then kindly sit down. I do not have time to waste." Vanessa remained silent, but her hands were clenched so tightly beneath the table that her knuckles whitened. Not out of fear for her brother, but because she knew the game they were playing was not fair, and the only thing that could shatter it was truth delivered at the right moment. She whispered, just loud enough for Derek to hear, "It's not over. They're closing their eyes, but they won't be able to turn away forever." Derek didn't reply, but in his eyes, for the first time, a flicker of belief appeared, fragile but real. Vanessa's heels clicked steadily against the marble floor, each step deliberate, neither rushed nor hesitant. She approached the witness stand upright, her gaze unwavering. The courtroom instinctively fell silent. Even prosecutor Thomas Blake paused his notes, eyes flicking toward her, wary. Something about this woman, no raised voice, no rebuttal, made even the most confident uneasy. Judge Richard Callahan, as if unable to tolerate the silence, spoke before Vanessa could utter a word. "Miss James, I hope you're not planning to waste the court's time with emotional appeals. We deal in law here, not tears." He leaned fully back into his chair, arms folded across his chest. His expression mirrored those who once told Vanessa to soften up during federal agent training. It was the same look she faced in meetings where her presence in the front row was rejected simply for being a black woman who refused to bow her head. Vanessa didn't blink. Her voice was level, unwavering. "I didn't bring tears to this courtroom, Your Honor. I brought the truth." A few murmurs rose. Someone in the audience held their breath, but Callahan merely curled his lip. "Let's hear this so-called truth before I cut you off for rambling." Vanessa gave a slight nod. She began to speak, her voice firm, about the night Derek was arrested, how his car was parked legally. He asked why he was ordered out, how the officer approached with his hand already on the holster, and how a brutal shove slammed Derek face first onto the pavement before his hands could even rise. But she didn't finish her sentence. Callahan raised a hand to interrupt. "Miss James," he said, his tone laced with a mocking chuckle, "you speak as if you're in law enforcement. Don't tell me you consider yourself an expert on police behavior." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, silent, not angry, just assessing him as though he had confirmed what she'd always known. He didn't want truth, only someone to say what he wanted to hear. Callahan pressed on, crushing the silence. "What experience do you have in law enforcement? Or are you just another keyboard warrior, always online criticizing but never worn the badge?" A few awkward laughs echoed. A clerk paused their notes. Defense attorney Jason Carter furrowed his brow, clearly wanting to object, but too unsure to interject. Vanessa showed no reaction. She returned to her seat slowly, without a word. But inside her, something had ignited. Derek looked at her as she sat down. His face was tight and his lips were pressed together. Vanessa gently placed her hand on his arm. And for the first time, she spoke quietly, just loud enough for him to hear, yet as though addressing the whole courtroom. They just crossed the last line I'm willing to tolerate. No one said a word as she sat, but something had shifted. Not in speech, not in documents, but everyone could feel a thick, invisible weight in the air itself. Judge Richard Callahan leaned back as if relieved to have defeated an inconvenient witness. He lifted his pen and tapped it lightly on the bench. Tick, tick, tick. The repeated sound underscored who held the reins in this room. Across from him, Thomas Blake still looked smug. He smirked and shrugged toward the jury as if to say, "See, just a mouthy black woman." But he didn't see Vanessa's gaze no longer rested on people. She was looking at the system, counting every interruption, every dismissed piece of evidence, every time the defense was silenced mid-sentence, and every time Callahan called truth, emotion, and prejudice a standard of judgment. Vanessa sat, hands loosely folded over her knees, her gaze seemingly still, but her mind turning like a clockwork mechanism wound to precision. The following 20 minutes played out like a textbook case of judicial bias. Defense attorney Jason Carter tried to call a witness who saw the arrest. Judge's response, irrelevant. He referenced the officer's disciplinary record. Response, past conduct is inadmissible. Jason submitted documents proving Marcus had no criminal history and had not resisted. Response, the court is aware, no need to repeat. Each argument cut off like a kite string snapped mid-flight. Vanessa didn't intervene. She took notes. She observed. At the end of the session, when the court recessed for 15 minutes, Derek stood as if his legs barely supported him. He said nothing. He padded into the hallway where the light was softer and no one looked at him like he was guilty from the moment he entered. Vanessa followed beside him. They walked in silence for several seconds. Then she placed both hands gently on his shoulders, looking him squarely in the eye. Derek, remember that game we used to play when we were kids? When you'd jump off the chair thinking you were falling free? Derek frowned, exhausted. What are you talking about? Vanessa smiled, not with joy, but with the calm of someone who knew the tide had shifted. You didn't know I had laid out pillows underneath. You thought you were falling. But I was already there, waiting. Derek looked into her eyes. You're mid-air right now, Derek. And this time, you don't need to wait to hit the ground, because I didn't just lay out a cushion. She tilted her head, voice lowering. I planted a bomb of truth beneath the floor. 15 minutes later, the court resumed. Vanessa re-entered the courtroom with slow, deliberate steps, unhurried, unshowy. But her gaze, now sharpened, made the whole room unconsciously adjust its posture. Across the aisle, Judge Richard Callahan tilted his head at her, as if to say, still haven't learned to stay quiet, have you? He didn't know that Vanessa had stayed silent for too long. And now every word she was about to speak would echo louder than the judge's gavel. Court is back in session, the clerk announced, voice emotionless. Everyone stood, then sat. Judge Callahan returned to his seat, as if ascending a throne. Same condescending posture, same eyes that dismissed anything outside his mold. But then, for the first time in the entire trial, Vanessa James rose before her name was called. Your Honor, she said softly but resonantly, I respectfully request to make a brief statement before the final argument is delivered. Callahan narrowed his eyes. He didn't like his power flow interrupted. Miss James, you've had more than enough to say already. This court is not your stage. Vanessa held her ground. She strolled to the center of the room, her footsteps echoing evenly across the marble floor. Each click of her heels struck a beat against the facade of hollow pride ruling this space. "I know this isn't a stage, Your Honor," she said, stopping mid-courtroom, "but it must be a place where truth is allowed to speak." A blink from the jury bench. A pen stopped mid-sentence. Even Prosecutor Thomas Blake straightened up. Vanessa took a deep breath, then reached into her blazer pocket. Every eye, including Callahan's, locked on her. No drama, no rush. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who needed no explanation. Her hand emerged holding a small black leather-bound item, a slim badge wallet. When she opened it, courtroom lights glinted off the silver crest that few in that room had ever seen in real life. The badge of the United States Secret Service. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary silence. It was the instant collapse of an entire belief system that the room had unconsciously upheld for years. Callahan leaned back slightly, his face hardening. Prosecutor Blake visibly paled. Defense attorney Jason Carter is young and earnest. He even forgot to breathe. Vanessa didn't look around. She stared directly at the judge. "I am Vanessa James, a Federal Secret Service agent with 10 years of service. I've protected presidents, led internal federal investigations, and dismantled power structures once thought untouchable." Her voice was not loud, but each word dropped like stones onto a still lake. "And I stand here today, not only as a sister, but as someone who understands the law, has lived it, defended it, and fought for it." No one spoke. Even the court clerk stopped typing. Callahan opened his mouth. His voice had lost its command. I fail to see how this relates to the defendant's case." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, as if he'd just asked something pitiable. "It relates, Your Honor, because I know when someone abuses power. I've investigated them. I've arrested them. And what I see is exactly that unfolding in this room." She stepped closer to the bench, her badge still visible. "I don't need emotion to prove I'm right. I have evidence, and if this court won't hear it, I will forward every detail to the federal level. The video, the suppressed testimony, and every mocking word directed at me, simply because I'm a black woman." A long silence. Everyone in that courtroom knew the line had been crossed, but not by Vanessa, by the system now peeled open with courtesy, legality, and irrefutable force. Derek James looked up, and in those weary eyes, for the first time since the cuffs had closed around his wrists, a spark. No one spoke. Judge Callahan still sat above, but now instead of reclining like always, he leaned forward slightly. His hand gripped the gavel, not to strike, but as if trying to hold on to a power that had just slipped away. Vanessa James didn't move further. She just stood there, badge still open in her hand, like a verdict that needed no signature. "Your Honor," she said, her voice lower, steadier, "you asked why I mentioned my service. Because only when I say who I am does my word carry weight. Only when I show this badge do I become worthy of being heard." She turned to face the jury, their eyes locked on her, now no longer with doubt. "That's what you all witnessed today." I was interrupted, evidence was dismissed, counsel was disregarded, and the defendant was accused, not for actions but appearance. Prosecutor Thomas Blake shifted in his seat but said nothing. He knew speaking now, even a single word, would ignite a wildfire of public outrage. Vanessa turned back to Callahan. "You called me a couch expert," she said, "but you didn't know I've investigated matters of national security, stood at crime scenes after assassination attempts, and taken fire to protect people you've only seen on TV. I don't need your belief. I need you to remember you don't get to define me just because your chair sits higher." Callahan tightened his lips. The skin on his neck turned red, not from anger, but from truth closing in. Vanessa stepped forward and placed her badge on the judge's bench. "This is not an accessory. It's the oath I carry daily that no one, no matter how powerful, has the right to bend justice to personal bias." The courtroom was no longer under Callahan's control. The atmosphere had shifted. No one saw Vanessa as just a witness anymore. She now led the courtroom's rhythm. With truth and authority, no one could dismiss. Vanessa drew a deep breath, then turned to the jury, her voice lower now, but laden with weight. "You are being asked to render a verdict. But how can a fair judgment be made when the scales were tilted from the start? How can justice exist if the truth must flash a badge just to be allowed to speak?" A middle-aged juror with graying hair bowed her head slightly, her eyes glistening with tears. Vanessa continued, "My brother Derek James is not a criminal. He is a victim, and not the only one. Today I did not stand for just my brother. I stood for everyone who's never had a mic in a fair courtroom." Callahan was now utterly silent. That silence was no longer arrogance. It was the sound of power dissolving. Vanessa returned to her seat without another word. But she had done something few dared. In that space made power listen. "The jury will now review the video evidence." Judge Callahan said, his voice flat like the surface of water before a stone breaks it. But Vanessa James knew even he could no longer steer the current. A court officer approached, plugging in the projector beside the bench. The machine clicked on. The big screen across the room glowed to life. Every head turned as though all were now facing a mirror, about to reflect something no one wanted to see. First frame, Derek James wearing a hoodie, hands on the wheel, speaking to the officer. The audio was clear. "I just want to know why I'm being pulled over, officer." His voice was calm, not loud, not confrontational, but there was no answer. Next frame, the officer approached, hand already on the holster, voice harsh. "Step out of the vehicle, right now." No explanation, no reason. The sound of boots echoed like hammers on the courtroom tiles, then a violent shove captured by the dashcam. Derek was thrown onto the hood. His head hit hard. His arms raised reflexively, then were instantly restrained. No resistance, no threatening move. Just a black man, shoved to the ground for daring to ask a question. The entire courtroom held its breath. The thud of Derek's head against the car hood rang out like a slap across years of excuses. Someone in the gallery gasped. A woman on the jury gripped her handbag tightly. The screen kept rolling. The officer yelling in Derek's face as he lay on the ground, "Stop resisting, don't move." But Derek was still, hands raised, blood trickling from his brow to his chin. Vanessa didn't look at the screen. She'd watched that video more than 20 times. She watched the people instead, the faces that once turned away when she spoke, the eyes that once doubted her as overreacting. Now, all fixed on the screen, silent, shaken. When the footage ended, the screen went black. 1 second, then 2. No applause, no rebuttals. Only the sound of a false belief in institutional innocence, fracturing. Vanessa stood. Her voice did not rise but carried across the room. "You've seen it. You've heard it. No more doubt. No more speculation. My brother did not resist. He was assaulted. And if we refuse to name this for what it is, then justice means nothing in this courtroom." Judge Callahan clenched both hands. He glanced at prosecutor Thomas Blake, who now had nowhere to rest his gaze. Vanessa lowered her voice, strolling to the defendant's table where Derek remained motionless. Truth has spoken today through video, and if that's still not enough to stir the people in power, then the problem isn't the evidence, it's the courage. She sat down. Her expression was calm, but her eyes sharp as blades locked on the seat that once looked down on her. No one dared cut her off anymore. Not because she was a woman, not because she was black, but because she was the only one in that courtroom that day who let truth stand. "Does the prosecution have anything for closing?" Judge Callahan asked, his voice, now low, no longer the sound of absolute command, only the echo of a man trying to stay upright as the chair beneath him trembled. Thomas Blake stood. He adjusted his tie, the motion no longer crisp. His face strained as if every muscle tried to mask what was now obvious. He had lost control of the narrative. "Your Honor, members of the jury, we've seen the video, we've heard the statements," Blake said, struggling for composure. "But let us not be swayed by emotion. The defendant still disobeyed an order, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is resisting." That argument hit the wall of truth like a pebble vanishing in deep water. Defense attorney Jason Carter stood, no longer trembling, no longer avoiding the judge's gaze. His voice wasn't loud but firm. "We are not judging an attitude. We are judging an act, and the only act proven today is a citizen was thrown injured and charged for asking why." Jason paused, turning to Vanessa as if drawing from her the strength he'd never known. "If the jury still holds a conscience, then the only question worth asking is, are we protecting the law or protecting those who break it?" And then Vanessa stood. No one called her name. No one handed her a microphone. But no one stopped her. She walked to the center of the courtroom. No badge, no invitation, only truth, and a heartbeat that never backed down. "I have just one last thing to say." The room was so quiet that one could hear one's pulse. "I didn't come here today to win. I came to prove truth doesn't need permission, it only needs to be seen. I spent 10 years in the Secret Service. I've seen the best of America and the worst. But what scares me most isn't those in power. It's the silence of those who know better, yet say nothing." She turned to face the jury. "This is no longer about Derek James. This is a trial of courage. Whether you'll break the silence or uphold a tradition that has cost people like my brother their dignity." Vanessa turned back to Judge Callahan. No anger, no fear, just one line: "Justice does not need to be dispensed from a higher bench. It needs to be returned to the rightful hands." Then she walked back, sat down, did not look back. And in that moment, the entire courtroom knew, whatever the verdict, the truest thing had already been spoken. Time inside froze. No pen taps, no whispers, only eyes, watching her every move. Vanessa James sat upright beside her brother, hands calmly folded in her lap, eyes forward, but not fixed on anyone. She watched the system, waiting to see if it would do what was right this time or close its eyes again. Once branded a resistor, Derek James stood tall but not rigid when asked, because beside him, for the first time in his life, stood someone who fought with him without needing permission. The clerk opened the side door. The jury returned. Everyone stood. No one spoke. No one breathed. No one blinked. A gray-haired woman stepped forward as the jury forewoman. She held a thin, folded sheet of paper so small it seemed too light to carry the weight of this moment. "Your Honor, we have reached a unanimous decision. Regarding the charge of resisting law enforcement against Derek James." The entire room held its breath. "We find the defendant not guilty." 1 second, 2, silence didn't explode. It shattered like glass crushed by the sheer weight of justice. Derek stood still, unsure he had truly been released. By two simple words, not guilty. Vanessa closed her eyes for a brief second. Not to cry, but to exhale a breath she had held for days. Since the moment Derek was cuffed, the world turned its back. Judge Callahan clenched his jaw. For the first time his voice cracked. The defendant is free. Court is adjourned. No well wishes, no thanks to the jury, just a man stripped of a mask of power he had worn too long. The room buzzed like a dam finally breaking. Attorney Jason Carter withdrew to a corner. He didn't need center stage. He knew who reclaimed the truth today was the woman sitting quietly in the front row. Derek turned to Vanessa, his eyes red, his voice trembling. "You saved me. I don't even know what to say." Vanessa gently squeezed his hand. "You don't have to say anything. You have to live the truth you just reclaimed." The courtroom doors swung open. Outside air was cooler yet heavier. Microphones, cameras, reporters and shouting names surrounded them like waves. "Miss James, why did you hide your badge? Derek, will you sue the police department? Do you believe the legal system can change?" Vanessa didn't respond right away. She placed a hand on Derek's back, guiding him calmly through the chaos, unhurried, unflinching. Only the stride of someone who knew truth had found its voice today. A small courtyard behind the courthouse is a rare pocket of peace amid the storm. The siblings sat on the stone steps, no cameras, no questions. Just people and life after a battle. Derek sat quietly, elbows on his knees, eyes downward, still unsure he was breathing in a world that no longer called him criminal. "Sis," he said, voice still hoarse, "I thought I'd never walk out of there uncuffed." Vanessa didn't look at him. She looked up at the courthouse, a towering structure of bricks, behind which lived countless judgments, countless rulings, not all of them just. And that, she said, is exactly why we can't stop. Today's verdict is a comma, not a period. Weeks later, Vanessa was invited to speak at a judicial reform summit. She didn't wear a uniform. She didn't carry a badge. She stood as a sister, a citizen, a survivor. "Justice isn't something that arrives on its own," she said. "It must be demanded with truth, courage, and the right words, spoken in the silence. My brother Derek is an ordinary man, yet that day he was charged like a threat because of his skin. I'm not here to claim every trial is broken. I'm here to ask how many are, and no one stood up for them." In the audience, those once silent began nodding. In the front row, Derek sat quietly, tears sliding down his cheeks, not from pain, but because someone finally spoke his name, in truth. Months later, they founded a non-profit, One Voice Legal Watch, one voice to change everything. They supported the wrongfully arrested, held workshops in high schools, trained youth on responding to stops and standing up without needing permission. Their story spread across platforms, not because it was sensational, but because it touched a truth everyone knew few dared to speak. And one October afternoon, as golden light touched the walls of the One Voice headquarters, Derek approached Vanessa with a folder and an application to join their legal outreach network. "I think I'm ready to stand beside you," he said, eyes steady. Vanessa smiled this time, a genuine smile. "Not beside. With me. Justice doesn't come from waiting. It comes from every step that doesn't retreat, every word that doesn't falter, and every ordinary person who dares the extraordinary when no one believes they can." And so a trial ended. A door opened, and truth after too many years was finally called by its rightful name.